Have you ever witnessed a crowd going wild during a clearance sale? People shoving each other over a TV or a phone that's half off. Tense faces, fixed eyes, hands clutching products like survival depended on it. Screaming, fighting, and a collective sense of urgency that no one can explain, only feel. Within minutes, reason disappears. The individual sense dissolves. What remains is a primitive, almost automatic impulse. Do what everyone else is doing. And in that kind of scene, something deeper is revealed. When humans become part of a crowd, they lose clarity of thought. They replace "I think" with "we are acting." And that's exactly where the danger lies. George Orwell was one of the few who understood this with piercing clarity. He realized that when an individual surrenders to the group without questioning, they become easy to manipulate. And he chose to turn that realization into a warning. The name of that warning? 1984. A novel that, although written in 1949, feels like it was made for today. It wasn't just about politics. It was about collective psychology. How fear, the desire for acceptance, and the illusion of the greater good can turn an entire society into a compliant herd, without anyone realizing it. And the most unsettling part is that he wasn't describing an impossible world. He was showing us exactly where we're headed if we don't pay attention. When a work of fiction starts getting confused with reality, something is out of place. That's what happened with 1984, a novel that stopped being just literature and became a reference in political debates, cultural discussions, and even entertainment shows. The book's title no longer belongs solely to its author. It's become a symbol of a time that seems to have shifted from future to present. George Orwell didn't need advanced technology to imagine a world where surveillance is part of daily life. All he had to do was observe the human tendency toward control, thought standardization, and fear disguised as civility. In 1984, control isn't enforced with chains, but with words, glances, and systems that pretend to protect, but actually imprison. Today, the title of the book shows up on magazine covers, in debates, headlines, and even in TV formats where everything is being watched. But unlike what we see on screen, real-life surveillance offers no prize. What's at stake is the autonomy of thought. Orwell wasn't describing machines. He was exposing mechanisms that still exist among us, even if disguised as progress. There's a thin line between community and blind obedience. When the collective good is used as the ultimate argument, the individual stops being a priority. And that's the breeding ground for totalitarianism. In 1984, power doesn't rely only on violence. It thrives on dissolving the I into the we. The logic is subtle. To protect society, you must give up your freedom. To ensure order, you must accept surveillance. To maintain harmony, it's better not to question. This kind of speech has already been used by regimes that shaped the 20th century, where the state presented itself as a father, a guide, even a redeemer, and in exchange for the promise of safety, it demanded total submission. But the danger isn't just in the leaders. It grows when people start believing they must sacrifice their own conscience in the name of a collective ideal. When the value of the individual becomes disposable, anything can be justified. Censorship, repression, punishment without trial. Collectivism, when taken to the extreme, becomes a poison that numbs personal responsibility. And that's where totalitarianism is born, not through brute force, but through the illusion that sacrificing freedom is a form of virtue. Fear is one of the oldest and most effective tools of control in history. In the world of 1984, people don't obey because they believe. They obey because they fear what happens to those who don't. The party didn't have to punish everyone. It was enough for a few to disappear in an exemplary way. The memory of someone who had vanished was enough to keep an entire city silent. That kind of collective fear turns every gesture into a risk and every word into a potential offense. Today, we don't live under the gaze of Big Brother, but we do live under the pressure of constant exposure. The media, algorithms, and online mob reactions, they all function as ways to keep thoughts confined within unspoken, yet deeply felt, boundaries. Orwell saw this coming before it happened. When fear becomes a part of daily life, people no longer need chains. They build their own cages. After a devastating war, the world described by Orwell doesn't reorganize itself in pursuit of peace, but rather into a tense and manipulative balance. 3 superpowers dominate the planet: Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia. They don't compete for the well-being of their people, but for control of the narrative, of scarcity, and of fear. No one knows for sure if the war between them is real or staged, and it hardly matters. What matters is that it never ends. Perpetual war serves as a distraction. A starving citizen doesn't ask for freedom, they just want to survive. And so, the state presents itself as a protector, even though it's the creator of the misery. This structure blocks any real progress, because a population focused on bombs and external enemies has no time to think about internal change. This division of the world also prevents any real alliances. The superpowers take turns being friends and enemies, but the people are always kept on edge. Yesterday's enemy is today's ally, and no one questions it. Logic doesn't matter, only obedience does. Orwell wasn't trying to predict the future. He was showing how far reality can be twisted when war becomes a tool of emotional control. He never shows up. He never gives interviews. He's never seen walking the streets or delivering speeches in public. And yet, everyone knows him. Everyone fears him. Everyone reveres him. Big Brother, in Orwell's work, is not a man. He's an idea, a symbol of absolute power, present everywhere and nowhere at the same time. His face is on posters, giant, screens and walls. His eyes seem to follow every step, every breath, every thought. He doesn't have to exist physically. All that matters is that everyone believes he does. And that belief keeps the system running. Because when people are afraid they're being watched all the time, they learn to watch themselves. The genius of this figure lies in his absence. Big Brother could be anyone, or no one. He represents the state elevated to the status of a deity, a being that punishes and rewards, that decides what is truth and what must be forgotten. He doesn't govern, he reshapes reality. Today, some people use the name lightly, even as a title for entertainment shows. But the origin of the term is far from amusing. It's a warning. Orwell showed us that real control doesn't need soldiers in the streets. All it takes is a gaze that never closes, even if it's only an image. Because once fear is internalized, freedom is already lost. That iconic face, with its fixed eyes and stern expression, became one of the most lasting symbols in modern literature. Decades later, it would inspire the name of a reality show that does exactly that. Constantly watches people, turning total exposure into entertainment. The difference is that, in the real world, people voluntarily step in front of the cameras. But in 1984, the goal is not to entertain, it's to paralyze. The image of Big Brother is everywhere, on streets, murals, coins, and television sets that also function as cameras. The result? A population that polices itself, because the fear doesn't come from punishment itself, but from the constant possibility of being watched. That uncertainty is what keeps the system alive. Big Brother is the most efficient myth ever created. He doesn't need to act. He only needs to exist as a psychological presence. A reminder that there's no room for secrets, doubts, or original thoughts. His face is the distorted mirror of an authority that doesn't want to be questioned, only worshipped. It's in this atmosphere that the division of society is sustained, not only through surveillance, but through a rigid and invisible hierarchy. At the bottom of the pyramid are the proles, the masses. They make up about 85% of the population. They live in poor conditions, often trapped in poverty, manual labor, ignorance, and simple pleasures. Lotteries, soap operas, games, and cheap alcohol keep their minds distracted and their bodies exhausted. They are free, but only because they pose no threat. As the party itself says, if there is hope, it lies in the proles. But that hope is fragile, because without critical awareness, there can be no uprising. And perhaps that's the most cruel trap of all, keeping people so numb that they don't even realize they're prisoners. In the middle of the pyramid is the outer party, the class of intellectual workers. These are the bureaucrats, technicians, teachers, and professionals who have access to more information and responsibilities. Winston Smith, the protagonist, belongs to this group. But here's the catch: they're also the most closely watched. They're required to maintain an appearance of absolute loyalty, even when silently filled with doubt. Here, control is psychological, linguistic, and even physical. A wrong look, a whisper at the wrong time, a facial expression deemed off. Any of it could be a thought crime. They serve as the bridge between power and the people, which makes them the prime target of relentless control. At the top is the inner party, the ruling elite. They are few, but they hold all the power. They decide what's real and what must be forgotten. There are no rules for them. They can lie, rewrite history, alter language, and erase people as easily as erasing a sentence on paper. They don't need consistency. They need control. And the most effective form of control is the one that turns lies into truth by decree. This caste structure isn't just functional, it's symbolic. It reveals that totalitarianism doesn't rely solely on surveillance and censorship. It also requires separation, a gap between bodies and minds. It needs one group that knows too much, another that knows little, and a majority that knows nothing at all. And the wider that gap, the more secure the throne on which the party sits. It wasn't enough to control what people said. The system had to shape what they thought, what they felt, even what they expressed on their faces without realizing. In Oceania, to live was to be constantly observed. Surveillance wasn't an exception. It was the natural state of things. In homes, in hallways, even within the walls themselves, there were telescreens, devices that constantly broadcast party messages and, at the same time, monitored anyone nearby. They were never turned off. There was no off button. You could be seen, heard, and judged at any moment. Silence was already suspicious. Fatigue could be mistaken for disapproval. The slightest sign of contradiction could be your downfall. And worst of all, even when the telescreens weren't actively watching, the fear of being watched was enough. The most effective kind of oppression is the one that turns the oppressed into their own jailers. But the system didn't stop there. Orwell described a world where control extended even into human relationships. Children were encouraged to report their own parents. Genuine friendships were dangerous. Deep affection was suspicious. Loyalty was not to family, nor to love. It was to the party, and the party alone. There was a name for this: the thought police, an entity responsible for identifying and eliminating any form of subversive thinking. It didn't matter whether you committed the crime out loud or in complete silence. Thinking for yourself was a risk. Thinking differently was betrayal. This culture of informing, where every gesture is a potential clue and every friend a potential traitor, isn't something left in the past. How many times today do we see people being exposed, judged, and publicly condemned for a single unexpected comment? Orwell's surveillance society might seem extreme, but the core idea remains. We are encouraged to monitor one another, to call out other people's errors, to correct behavior in the name of some collective morality. And this happens not just on the streets, but on screens, in comment sections, in the watchful eyes of a crowd ready to point fingers. The most dangerous kind of surveillance isn't the one from outside. It's when it becomes internal, when every word is measured, every emotion adjusted, every thought filtered, until one day you're no longer sure if you're lying or if you've forgotten what it means to be truthful. Imagine growing up being taught that thinking is dangerous, that reflecting too much can lead to ruin. In Oceania, the party didn't just censor what was said, it prevented certain ideas from ever being formed. That's the context in which one of Orwell's darkest and most effective concepts appears. Crime Stop. Crime Stop isn't about making a mistake. It's about stopping it before it even happens. It's a kind of mental reflex that blocks any thought that goes against the party. An automatic response, trained from early childhood. When a suspicious idea begins to form, it's instantly shut down. Without noise, without struggle, without pain. It's the extermination of thought before it ever has the chance to exist. Children were indoctrinated to identify and eliminate these thoughts in themselves and in others. They were trained to detect suspicious micro-expressions, tone of voice, and deviant words. They learned to cut off these ideas at the root, like pulling a weed from a garden. They became experts not only in interrupting their own thoughts, but also in stopping the thoughts of others. The result? Entire generations that no longer knew how to think deeply, who mistook obedience for wisdom and saw doubt as a moral flaw. Crime Stop doesn't operate through force, it operates through speed. It's the thought that never completes, the doubt that is never allowed, the criticism that dies before being born. It's mental programming that prevents the emergence of awareness. Does it seem far from our reality? Maybe, but think about situations where someone begins to question a popular idea and is immediately silenced, labeled, or excluded. How many times have you avoided thinking something simply because you knew it would be wrong to have that thought? In a world where invisible rules dictate what we're allowed to feel, desire, or imagine, Crime Stop is no longer fiction. It's a social mechanism in full operation. Orwell showed that the most effective form of totalitarianism isn't the one that shouts orders. It's the one that trains minds. When an individual learns to cut off their own thoughts before they blossom, the system no longer needs to punish them, because the punishment is already happening on the inside, silently, and freedom becomes nothing more than a forgotten word written in a dictionary no one remembers how to read. To say that two opposing ideas can both be true might sound like a logical mistake, but in 1984, it's a requirement for survival. The name of this concept? Doublethink. One of the most disturbing and unsettling ideas Orwell ever created. Doublethink is the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs and accept both as true. It's knowing, for example, that war destroys, and still believing it's necessary for peace. It's seeing a leader lie, and still believing they represent honesty. It's repeating that 2 + 2 = 5, and over time, truly believing it. To the party, this isn't an error, it's the core of control. Because when the human mind accepts contradiction without conflict, it surrenders. It loses the ability to distinguish reality from fiction, truth from falsehood, freedom from oppression. Sanity is slowly corroded until there's no solid center of awareness left to resist. This isn't just about convincing someone of a lie. It's about teaching them to lie to themselves sincerely. The party demands that you know you're being deceived, but that you keep obeying as if you weren't. This destroys the spirit of resistance, because the greatest danger isn't being fooled. It's losing the will to know the truth. Sound extreme. Think about all the times someone knows something is wrong, but chooses to believe the opposite, out of convenience, fear, or just exhaustion. The conscious denial of reality has become a daily habit. There are those who defend causes they don't understand, repeat slogans they don't believe in, or condemn actions they secretly practice. All of it, wrapped in the appearance of conviction. Doublethink is a sophisticated form of slavery. It doesn't chain the body, it paralyzes the mind. When you accept contradiction as normal, you lose the ability to tell where control ends and your will begins. Doubt disappears, logic gives way to conformity, and the world can be rewritten endlessly without resistance. Orwell didn't create this concept to scare us. He created it to warn us. Because the most dangerous lie is the one you've learned to repeat, with pride. Language isn't just a way to communicate. It's the space where thought occurs. It's impossible to form complex ideas without the right words. And what if those words disappeared? In 1984, George Orwell presents Newspeak, an artificial language designed to restrict, distort, and ultimately eliminate critical thought. The principle behind Newspeak is simple. If an idea can't be expressed, it ceases to exist. By reducing vocabulary, eliminating synonyms, and erasing dangerous words, the party strips people of their ability to articulate any kind of resistance. You can't rebel if you don't know what freedom is. You can't crave justice if the word itself has been erased from your emotional dictionary. Newspeak doesn't aim to simplify thought. It aims to replace it with automatic responses. Terms like thought crime and good thinker condense entire ideas into single words, loaded with built-in judgment. So, by using official language, you're already thinking within the boundaries imposed by the party, without even realizing it. In the real world, this may sound like exaggerated fiction, but think about how the use of certain words shapes public debate today. Terms are redefined, repurposed, or even replaced to avoid conflict. Neutral expressions become politically charged. Some words disappear for no longer being appropriate. It may seem like progress, but it can also be a subtle form of control over what people are allowed to think. Orwell shows us that the war against freedom doesn't need to be fought with weapons. It can be won silently, hidden in the folds of vocabulary. Because when language becomes a tool of power, thought itself comes under surveillance, not by cameras, but by words. And perhaps the most important warning from Newspeak is this: if you don't defend your right to name the world in your own way, someone else will. And they'll convince you that you're thinking for yourself. In Oceania, everything is the opposite of what it seems. The Ministry of Peace promotes war. The Ministry of Truth spreads lies. The Ministry of Plenty creates scarcity. And the Ministry of Love, that's where torture happens. This inversion isn't a mistake. It's a strategy. It disables logical thought and subjects the mind to constant confusion. The book's most iconic phrase, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength," sums up the entire structure of the party's manipulation. When logic is twisted to the extreme, the individual loses any point of reference for reality. They no longer know what's right, what's wrong, or whether their own perceptions are valid. This play on words isn't just literary, it's psychological, a kind of mental conditioning where the individual learns to accept the absurd, distrust their own eyes, and repeat slogans that cancel out reason. The more contradictory, the more effective, because a tired mind stops resisting. And in this way, the regime no longer needs to ban dangerous thoughts. It just teaches people to silence them on their own. The Hate Week is a collective explosion of targeted rage. For 7 days, the population is encouraged to unleash all their anger onto a designated enemy of the state. Posters are torn, down, fiery speeches are delivered, and everyone screams together. It doesn't matter why, as long as they're hating the right enemy. The party doesn't just tolerate hatred, it cultivates it. The emotion that could become revolt against the regime is redirected toward manufactured targets. And more than that, shared emotion reinforces group identity. Those who hate together stay together. This catharsis isn't just a distraction, it's a tool to maintain loyalty. If you're yelling at the enemy, you're not questioning the leader, and the more you hate, the less you think. Rationality gives way to impulse, and control tightens. In practice, Hate Week shows how manipulating emotions can be just as effective as censorship. A population in a constant state of outrage doesn't have time to reflect, and that's exactly what a totalitarian regime wants. George Orwell wasn't against socialism, but against what had been done with it. His experience in the Spanish Civil War, where he witnessed betrayal, lies, and repression within so-called revolutionary groups, was a turning point. He realized that even under the banner of equality, the thirst for power could turn victims into oppressors. In 1984, Orwell criticizes oligarchical collectivism, a system where an elite rules in the name of the common good. There's no individual freedom, and the state becomes an end in itself. Everything is done for the people, but never with the people. The party claims to act for the collective, but only strengthens its own authority. This criticism goes beyond ideology. Orwell shows that the real danger lies in absolute control, regardless of the flag it waves. When freedom of expression disappears, when surveillance takes over, when the individual is no longer recognized as an autonomous being, it doesn't matter whether the regime calls itself socialist, capitalist, or anything else. It is totalitarian. Orwell believed in social justice, but never at the cost of individual liberty. His experience with revolutionary movements taught him that even the noblest causes can become tools of oppression when power goes unquestioned. His work is a warning. Every good intention can be corrupted if there's no vigilance against authoritarianism, even those that claim to be liberating. At the end of 1984, Winston Smith faces the greatest challenge of his life, remaining sane in an insane world. Imprisoned, tortured, broken, he holds on to one simple truth: 2 + 2 = 4. But the party demands more than obedience. It demands that he believe 2 + 2 = 5. That scene is the breaking point. It shows that true control isn't about dominating bodies, it's about invading the mind. Forcing someone to deny the obvious is to make them lose their identity. Sanity becomes an act of resistance. In a world where words change meaning, where the past is rewritten, where hatred is encouraged and language is restricted, thinking for yourself becomes a rebellious act. Perhaps freedom survives not in grand gestures, but in small moments of clarity, in the quiet strength of those who, even in the face of absurdity, still refuse to deny the obvious. Even when everyone else says otherwise, there are still those who remember what it means to say with courage, 2 + 2 = 4. Orwell leaves us with a question that still burns. What does it take to stay free when everything around you demands submission?